So welcome to Transform Gov, the Digital Government Podcast. Transform Gov is part of the Ireland eGovernment Awards, and it's brought to you in association with Accenture. And I'm Maeve Kneafsey. So when a public organisation faces a crisis, how do you speak directly to the people you serve and regain their trust? In 2024, RTE launched a bold campaign with a clear message: we're here to do better for you. It didn't just strike a chord, it actually was shortlisted as a finalist for the Ireland eGovernment Awards in the category of marketing and social media. So today I'm joined by the team behind it, which is Joe Hoban and Tracey Diamond of RTE, to talk about rebuilding trust, going public in the middle of a storm, and what every public sector team themselves can learn from their experiences. So Joe and Tracey, thank you very much and welcome to Transform Gov.
Thanks so much for having us, Maeve.
Thanks, Maeve. Good to see you.
So for those who haven't seen the campaign, what was it all about and why did you decide to launch it in the first place?
Well, I suppose the campaign came, as you said, Maeve, after the crisis, which was obviously at a time when staff morale was on the floor. Reputation for RTE was not in a good place, as you can imagine. But it also came at a time after which RTE had produced two really important documents. One was the RTE's new direction strategy, 2025 to 2029. And the other one was the new governance framework. So Joe came to me at that time with a brief. And in the brief, he said to me, Tracey, we have our documentation now. We have this positive moment where, out of a crisis, never waste a good crisis, as they say. We need to now create a consumer-facing message to start rebuilding trust around RTE. And I suppose the question that he posed to me in that brief, or the crux of that question, was, why does RTE exist and why does public media exist? And, I suppose if anything good came out of the crisis, it was the fact that question was asked and that the conversation turned to that question. And in that sense, it was quite an easy brief to respond to because, I do, like most of my colleagues in RTE, I do feel really passionate about the value of public service media to society. So I guess the words then were in response to that core question, why do we exist?
I suppose part of a lot of public sector organisations is when a crisis like that hits, the choice is to just stay silent, and kind of put your head down. But you decided to go absolutely the opposite, really, and kind of listen, I suppose, and go on air. So what was the driver behind that decision? Obviously I heard what you said, but, rather than kind of keep a low key presence and hope for it to kind of blow over, why did you feel we have to do something about it?
Well, I think, at the first thing that really came out of the crisis was that RTE's relationship with its audience was reset, and not necessarily reset in a way that I think any of us who work in RTE and who believe in the innate value of public service media would have wanted. So I suppose in a way, Maeve, there really wasn't any choice because, RTE has a mandate. It exists in statute, and RTE's public service objects are really serious and they're very, very important. And they only have resonance and they only have meaning if the audience is consuming them and receptive to them. So I think it would be fair to say that there wasn't really, from our point of view, I suppose, as the brand custodians of RTE, there wasn't really any choice except but to go to the audience and essentially reset and recalibrate that relationship with the audience and recognise the depth and the seriousness of the crisis that happened. And I think the depth and the seriousness too of the potential for that break with the audience. So really that was a very compelling mandate. That time was the right time as well. As Tracey said, we had completed various processes in relation to governance and all the things that had to happen. So it was the time to go to the audience and restate RTE's purpose. Why does RTE exist? And to echo Tracey's point, if anything good came out of that crisis, it was that opportunity to really reassess RTE's core purpose as a public service media organisation. with the emphasis on public service.
And I think anything, if we hadn't acknowledged the elephant in the room within that campaign, it would have just been tone deaf. RTE was so public, that crisis, that for us to come out with a shiny new ad talking about how brilliant we are would just be so tone deaf. And, we needed to be authentic. We needed to be contrite, but also confident in the new reforms, which we were. So, from that perspective, as Joe said, we knew that we had to do it.
I mean, a big part of every conversation, which is ironic. I mean, we're not talking about digital transformation on its own in this conversation. It's much wider than that. But for all of the CIOs I've spoken to, trust is fundamental. If you're actually going to be able to do anything with the public. So I understand that completely. But I suppose it's hard to strike a balance, isn't there, between acknowledging what happened and then not undermining what you're going to do in the future. So how did you kind of figure out that balance?
It was a long road. Like, I think we talked a lot about it. It was a very collaborative process. I think we leaned into the key strength that we saw coming out of that crisis, and that was RTE's coverage, of it all. So I think the way that we, the vast majority of that piece of copy is platforming and championing all of the amazing content genres that we produce, and the kind of genres that we know that are valued from RTE.
If anyone hasn't seen the ad, be amazed.
Yeah.
But if they haven't, you can actually see it on YouTube, can't you?
Search for it. It's RTE, We're Here to Be Better for You.
Yeah.
We first of all, we showed, documentaries, local drama, sport, kids, young people's content, music, like the RTE Concert Orchestra, investigative journalism, Irish language, news. So that was the answer to the question, why do we exist? And then the acknowledgement came at the end, and that came just in a really natural way, where the voiceover artist said, we're here to ask the tough questions. And then we hear a clip of Sarah McInerney from Drive Time asking a question of, or introducing another piece on RT's coverage of its own scandal, followed by the VO saying, even when those tough questions are for ourselves. RTE, we're here to be better for you. So that's how we tied it up.
There was an interesting statistic that we were grappling with that in terms of a metric that we came across pretty much at that point toward the tail end of the crisis, and that was that remarkably, through all of our brand tracking, which we do, perceptions of RT's value to society had actually remained really stable and high, above the 80%, above the 75% mark. They hadn't actually declined. What had actually declined was the personal value. So RT is important to me. So it was an interesting dichotomy in that people were still willing, even post-crisis, to say, look, public service media, brackets, RTE, is important to Irish society, but I don't feel it's so important to me anymore. And I think what the insight that gave us was that actually what people value in RTE is not necessarily broken. It's actually the personal relationship that people have with the broadcaster, of which trust is an innate part. So really that kind of guided us, and I'm sure that's what guided you, Tracey, and how you approached writing the copy for that piece. And really the whole piece builds to that acknowledgement at the end that we're here to be better. And it's not just an acknowledgement, it's also a pledge, and I think, and a promise.
And in terms of, I felt the whole way through watching it, that there was actually a relationship being built with yourselves as well. I mean, it must have had a positive impact internally as well in terms of morale and people's reframing how they felt about themselves.
And that was really important, Maeve, actually, to all of us, because as I mentioned at the outset, like, staff morale obviously took a massive hit during that whole crisis. But a lot of people in RTE, they feel a real vocation towards public service media. So I think they needed to have their, just their strengths built back up. And hopefully this did that, from an internal perspective. It was cathartic to write for that reason, I think. It was when you've been dragged through everything that RTE brought upon itself during that crisis, it was really cathartic then to just reframe the conversation to, yes, there were massive issues in terms of how the organisation was run, But that is separate to the great work that people do every day in terms of making great public service content.
And the catharsis, if you like, was, as you say, as much internal as external, because that restatement of purpose and the here to be better and the ultimate tagline on screen is Ireland's National Public Service Media, I'm trying to remember. And out of that was born really the tagline that we're now using on all of our marketing communications, which is RTE, your public service media. And on the face of it, it's a very simple line, and maybe it appears absolutely self-evident and obvious. But I think there's power in that simplicity, and that the simplicity of that statement, your public service media, I don't think that we would have arrived at that point without the crisis. And I don't think anyone ever wants to experience a crisis like that again. I certainly don't. As head of communications, it was a very difficult time. But I think we have ended up at we did get something valuable out of it in terms of the purpose, the public purpose of the organisation.
Yes. Or reminding, I suppose, everybody really that there is a public... I mean, so much of the conversation about RT in the years previous have been about the media and media just changing and how you're going to cope with that and how the revenues from advertising, and in a way that distracted from the fact that a state, a democracy needs a really strong media. And so I suppose out of the crisis, you're kind of saying, well, actually, it allowed us to reframe it for ourselves as well as everybody else. Like we don't have a public service news, a broadcaster, then where's the independence going to be in terms of our news? But look, I suppose when you're building trust, what does it look like? What does it really look like? How are you showing people, I suppose, that the trust to be trusted?
Well, that's it. Like, it's not about what we say. It's not about what we write in an ad. It's about the way that we conduct ourselves. It's what we do. So, we're very aware of the fact that, we can come up with beautiful copy for an ad. But then if we then completely contradict what we say we're doing because somebody somewhere messes up and creates a scandal, then that completely, there's no point to it at all. So trust isn't what we say about ourselves. Trust is built through grafting, through consistently showing up in an authentic way, fulfilling promises, etc. But the campaign came out of that new RTE new direction strategy and the new governance framework. So it was built on strong foundations. It was built on a new reformed organisation. So they weren't just words. There was meaning behind them, and
Good. Well, I want to delve into that. Just a little bit of a pause for a second because I've got to thank some important people. So we'll be back in 2 seconds.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
Okay, so you're both, I suppose you'd call you communications professionals. So how has the experience been, to be part of kind of in the eye of a storm? Because it was an eye of a storm, wasn't it?
Yeah, often the periphery of the storm as well, which is kind of even more violent. I suppose we had different experiences insofar as Tracey, you're more on the marketing and the brand end of things. I was a little bit jealous of you at times. There was a level of
at that point, yeah.
I mean,
you were corporate communications, right?
Yes, yeah. So myself and the communications team were on the front lines. Look, it was it was an incredibly challenging time. I think for the duration, in terms of how long the intensity of the crisis lasted, and I suppose we were in that place that no communications person ever wants to be, which is dealing with the unexpected.
Yeah, and on the back foot.
And the unthinkable.
Yeah.
And the unforeseeable from our perspective, which I think all of the elements of that crisis certainly were for us. But again, I suppose I don't really want to dwell on that too long, because ultimately we are here now in 2025, and from my current position as head of communications, marketing, brand and social media, I think that we have extracted something really precious, I think, from that crisis, which is your public service media positioning, which we are now applying universally across everything that we do, and not just applying it as a stamp. It's really informing our approach. From our latest GAA campaign, we're in Bloom in Phoenix Park, and shortly, it's informing how we are showing up at our public events. It's informing how we are approaching our campaigns. It's informing what we do on social media. So it's allowed us to articulate that purpose through all of our key verticals and all of our key distribution points.
I suppose one of the things I was thinking about was budget, because it's always a problem, right? There's always a gap between your ambition and the budget, and particularly in the public sector. So from your perspective, what was kind of more important in this case for this campaign beyond budget, that made it work?
I mean, there was no budget, to be frank. Tracey is our corporate brand and marketing manager. Tracey wrote the copy. And it was Tracey who did all of the research into the clips. People can often...
Congratulations, it's very strong.
People can often be on, and I'm not talking over you just because you probably wouldn't say this yourself, but people are often under, I think, a misapprehension that organisations such as RTE are operating with very large marketing budgets. We're not at all. We're heavily reliant on, I suppose, the ingenuity and the creativity of our own people. Classically, such a campaign as this would be sort of outsourced to an agency. That budget just simply didn't exist. So all credit to
Thanks,
Tracey
Joe.
for...
We worked with an incredible editor outside of RT from Lore Films, Cathy Dunn. So she's worth a mention. And I think it needed to happen in-house. I think it was one of those pieces that actually you could give that to an agency, but you sort of needed to live and
They
breathe.
might polish it too much.
Yeah.
And then you lose that authentic voice.
Exactly. Like in the original concept, we talked about it actually being voiced by staff members, and that they would be in shot. We wanted this to be from RTE in the most authentic way. So yeah, there was little to no budget. And including for media. So in terms of the media plan, we leveraged RTE's owned media, both linear and digital. But there was no budget to support, for instance, paid digital campaign. But what we did was we boxed clever wherever we could in terms of getting the most out of our organic channels, which Joe had built up consistently over a number of years.
Social media?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So with social media, I think we were doing a tally. We were in or around 1 million followers across all the main social platforms for RTE as an organisation. So that's not including...
As a corporate entity.
As a corporate entity, exactly. Not including service brands, as we call them. So, having that foundation when you're going out organically with a message definitely helped. And then we did what we could in terms of following best practice around the best formats in terms of cut downs of the asset, the best, testing the copy that we were using for the social posts to make sure that we were getting the best engagement that we possibly could for no spend.
So were you doing kind of A/B testing of different messaging?
Exactly, but with no spend. So we were sort of doing it in an organic way ourselves, Similarly, we used obviously RTE Player, which is a huge digital platform for us. RTE's YouTube channel, which has about 300,000 subscribers. And we have built up a really extensive CRM database of about 300,000. So we're very fortunate, I suppose, that we have a good foundation there in terms of getting messages out with low budget.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you do have the channels, right, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But then again, you built everything in-house in terms of the creative.
Yeah. And we should say, we do absolutely have the channels. And in that context, all credit to the media management team. It's a manual job, believe it or not, still, placing in-house spots like that. And they really did a great job just in terms of achieving really significant reach for the campaign. I think 60% of all adults saw the campaign at least once, which outside of a paid media context was, a significant success for us because it was really important that people heard the message.
Absolutely. And you use Brand Tracker, you mentioned.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. So that, I think, again, remember, everybody else is kind of trying to learn away from your crisis. So how useful was that in terms of your messaging, your audience?
Yeah, well, I mean, our audience insights team run a quarterly brand tracker, which is a mix of qual and quant. So we rely on that really as our
a solution, an online solution, or
no. It's via
a partner that we work with, an audience partner. It's a 2,000 sample size, and it's representative across the country.
Yeah,
and it's a survey based approach.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we use that. Really, it's kind of our foundational guide in terms of how we're performing. So we could see in quarter one, in quarter four, 23, the years are melding into one, and in quarter one, 24, we could see really, how the value to me scores, the extent to which they had dipped, the perceived value of TV license had really substantially dipped. Trust in RTE as an organisation had gone down, but worryingly, trust in RTE News had also gone down. And, I think what was important about the Here to Be Better campaign was that it started us on essentially on a campaign path. And just last week, we received the brand tracking results for quarter one, 2025. And I think that we were extremely relieved, and I think gratified to see that, trust in news had rebounded from 55% up to 70%. Value of TV license, perceived value of TV license had come back from 19% up to 40%. And personal value to me had come back to 67%, which was actually higher than it was pre-crisis.
When they bounced back, did they bounce back to what they were other than that prior to the crisis? Or
So in the case of value to me, it was higher. For news, I think it was level pre-crisis, and value of TV license was actually higher than pre-crisis.
Fantastic. Well, look, I'm going to take a very short break because we have to let people know about the R&D Government Awards, which, of course, our guests are finalists from last year. We want to make sure that you all know how to enter, so I'm going to take a pause. We've got amazing news.
Like what?
Amazing news. The judges have done their job.
About time.
They've gone through the avalanche of entries that we got this year, and they've selected the shortlist. So it's now up on our website, so digitalgovawards.com. Make sure to check it out and see if you're there.
You're talking to a judge.
Am I?
I am one of them.
Okay.
So I know what went on, and I know how rigorous it is, and it is absolutely rigorous.
And it's very difficult actually to judge, I think.
It is very, because you're apples, oranges, cheese, everything is so different. All the projects are so different. All of them are so interesting.
Absolutely. And I know that, our Accenture were even saying to us the categories this year are so diverse, because it's everything from smart cities through to healthcare, through to local authority. So there's everything in there. And the shortlist reflects that. It's a really, really, really good.
And you mentioned Accenture. Why?
Because they're our sponsor. They make this all possible. Like, we've got fantastic category sponsors, but we've also got Accenture as our main sponsor, and they also sponsor the podcast.
So if I wanted to know who is shortlisted, where would I go?
You go to digitalgovawards.com. So digitalgovawards.com, everything's up there, so you can see if you're there. And of course, don't forget to get your tickets if you plan to come. It's really important to book fast because they do go really quickly. And again, this year, O'Reilly Hall, fantastic venue.
And it's a great, fun event. It is fun.
It is. Everybody enjoys it. Nobody ever says they won't come back. They all come back. So please, make sure if you want to be there that you get that ticket booked. So we're back after that little pause. Thank you very much. So we're just left our conversation with my lovely guests talking about the fact that RTE has managed to kind of really bounce back in terms of really critical things, which is trust by the public, particularly around the news and other areas, and also value on a personal, individual level. So what do you think? Okay, of course, the campaign that was shortlisted and finalist is very important. But beyond that, what do you think helped to contribute to that bounce back?
I think it's such a range of things, and it's very individual to people. So, for instance, we've had some exceptional content recently that we've been able to celebrate. We've also had, massive investments in the likes of RTE Player, so that the experience that people are having finding us and viewing us has massively improved. Obviously there is the positioning piece that Joe brought in around your public service media, and I guess just having one clear message and rolling that out across everything. I think it's a combination of things, and while I would love to say that it was that particular campaign, I would say that's very unlikely. Mm-hmm. It was a combination of efforts from all across the organisation. To be fair,
But I think that, and of course, it wasn't just that campaign, much as marketeers would love to make that claim. But I think what we could say is that campaign was consistent with all of the other elements and items that led, I think, RTE back to a position of relative health, from our Director General and his, personal and professional credibility, the leadership team, the implementation of the Expert Advisory Committee recommendations, the launch of the 5-year strategy, the delivery of elements of that 5-year strategy. And, I think, Maeve, you were alluding earlier, what are the building blocks of trust? And I think for any consumer brand, but particularly for a media brand, I think what has been so important from an RT perspective is accessibility, and stability around accessibility. The RT player is a very different product now than it was 2 years ago in terms of stability of experience.
I suppose in a way the macro environment as well sometimes lends itself to changing people's attitudes as well. So if we didn't have what's going on in North America, and people's consciousness of how trustworthy the media is and how non-biased they are, maybe it just polarizes people's view of actually the value that RT bring. Because in contrast, sometimes something else can look a lot worse. And you've got to be able to turn somewhere for news, don't you? And information and trust the voice. Now, I'm not saying there's not a whole lot of other stuff going on, but I think it's certainly, for consumers, I think it probably contributed to people re-looking at their own media.
And I think an unexpected flip side of globalization is that, or maybe an unintended outcome of it is that the local becomes more and more important. And I think we can absolutely see that.
Why is it? I mean, I agree with you, but why? What is it? Why does the local become more important in a global environment?
If there are more options now for streaming services than there ever were. But at the same time as that, there were 142 million streams in RT Player last year. That was up 42% year on year.
Is that because the experience is better, or is it because of the content?
It's the experience is better, but it's obviously driven by the content. I would hope, and locally produced content produced in Ireland by Irish creators is really important to people who live here and who consume that content. So, when television came in, everybody thought it was the death of cinema, but yet then cinema went through a revival. So things are not always necessarily heading the way that we think they are. The indicators are not always. The indicators are rarely actually ever reliable, because the big unreliable and the big unquantifiable is what people want. And that's why tracking a metric like value to me is so important to us in terms of how as a measure of success.
Yeah.
And in terms of that macro piece as well, I mean, as everybody knows, with the amount of information and content that's being created now, and particularly with the evolution of AI, misinformation and disinformation is a major issue. That's a macro issue, but it really brings to the fore, I suppose, the importance of a public service media to a country's democracy, to society. So nice segue for me to give a shout out to the RT News department, who have, recently launched RT Clarify, which is a strand of RT News that debunks misinformation and disinformation, which all of the evidence suggests that people are extremely concerned about in their day-to-day lives. And just to Joe's point as well about globalization, like, I have 2 small kids at home, and whether or not I work in RTE, it is important to me that they consume Irish content. I watch my daughter. Sometimes we like drop the ball a little bit, and we let her watch, a lot more content on YouTube. And like it does matter to me that she then develops an American twang. You know, like I don't want
That's
that.
the least of your worries.
Yeah, like well, obviously it's supervised, but I just mean, you know, I want her to experience Irish culture. I want her to consume Irish media. I want her, you know, so that's the value to me personally of RTE.
And that makes complete sense. I suppose I'm thinking now of our audience. You know, obviously this is fantastically interesting, but they're also thinking, how does this apply to me? So if there were any tips, because look,
Hopefully it never does.
Hopefully it never does. But everybody, you know, there's going to be crises in any organisation of any size if it's serving the public. But were there any things that you kind of feel you learned coming out of this that maybe you didn't know before that you'd advise other people to do? I mean, firstly, I think we hear loud and clear is upfront and speak to people. You know, you don't hide. Anything else that you'd think would be useful to share?
I think simplicity. There really is something to simplicity. Particularly when it comes to defining your purpose. And for me, an organization's purpose almost kind of trumps vision, it trumps mission, and it trumps a lot of strategy. Defining a clear, appreciable, understandable, and consumable purpose that is relevant and authentic can open up a brand and really bring you right into people's front rooms, onto their doorsteps, into their homes in a way that is really authentic. I think authenticity, not being afraid to be simple and be authentic, has been a real guiding light that has come out of this campaign.
And a single voice. And I think maybe that's to be. I mean, your role is encompassing communications, marketing, and social media, which to me sounds like they all belong together anyway. But if they weren't before, there's a risk that you won't have the same message and the same, I suppose, values. So do you think that made a difference as well? Centralizing that under one person and then being able to make that happen?
Yeah, I think what that enabled was a single strategy approach. Which is there are challenges in delivering a single strategy, single strategic approach in an organization that historically has operated, in silos, and in where the separation between platforms is not just technological, it's almost cultural, internally cultural and psychological. So, pushing forward that idea that your public service media applies to radio, applies to news, applies to RT Player, applies to RT Kids, applies to everything that we do. And I think, it resulted in a little bit of soul searching, but necessary soul searching. There used to be a distinction in RTE between, never a formal distinction, but I think informally people would have made a distinction between content that was public service content and content that wasn't public service content. But everything that RTE does has a relevance within RTE's public service objects. And if it doesn't, then we shouldn't be doing it. And I think that kind of clarity definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I was just thinking that we've still a little bit to talk about, really, because we have to delve into a little bit more of the nitty-gritties around the campaign as well, and a couple of other things I want to talk to you about. So I think we should do a little bit of a part two. I'm sure the audience agree with me 100% that we should do a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to thank you for part one. It was very insightful. Thank the studio, and then we'll come back and we'll do part two. So thank you to Joe and Tracey, obviously, for being here. It's so interesting. And also, if people wanted to get in touch with you, to other public service organisations, would you be happy enough to share some of your knowledge? Would they contact you via LinkedIn, or what way would you like to do that?
LinkedIn for me, Tracey Diamond. You'll find me Central Brand and Marketing Manager with RTE.
Very good.
Yeah.
And
Joseph Hoban, Head of Marketing, Communications, Social, Events, Brand.
And they're both on LinkedIn, I checked. Okay, so thank you very much. So I've also the studio, of course. Studio Manager Peter Bryce, thank you so much. Video Editor Neil Horner, and then Lee Brennan, who's the man with two hats, sound engineer today and videographer. And thanks as always to South Dublin Podcast Studios.